14th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And do we have any changes or updates in
There was that
addition?
one typo that passed around everybody has in front of them.
Any others?
No further changes.
Okay. Roll call for approval, or just all in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have some time set aside, 15 minutes, for those individuals who might like the opportunity to address the committee on any matter that is not listed on the agenda. We do not have anyone here present in the boardroom. Do you have any other communications?
Zero virtually.
Great. Okay, on to business. This is a continued discussion regarding alternative revenue sources for stormwater infrastructure, also known as a stormwater utility. And Drew, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. We're going to walk through a presentation that's going to kind of remind everybody the steps that have already been taken, talk about our schedule, and share the information that we plan to share with you all tonight. So let's get going. Okay. So, yeah, which I already hinted to, we're going to talk about the plan of action that was set out by the Finance Committee months ago, talk about the project funding, what that would look like now in this changing marketplace, talk about the fee methodology, which everybody's kind of nodded their head at least at the Finance Committee so far, and then talk about what does this fee structure look like for certain key users, and then also what would staff suggest with regards to a credit policy. And so that's where we last left off. So we have a timeline, looks like this. The good news is we're slightly ahead of schedule, and we would likely move some Q2 activities to Q3 just to kind of actually, it makes more sense to do it, which you guys can decide if you, like for example, we're going to be talking about the key users, we're talking about the credit program, and then some of this other future community engagement aspect probably could be best done together in Q3. So we were just suggesting that we move those activities to that within the timeline. But also, I guess the other really bit of good news that was talked about and approved at the last board meeting was the phase 1 for the trunk system is underway now with the county. And they're covering that, most of those costs. The village is picking up 16%. Yes?
I have a question for you. On the previous slide, phase 1 is underway, as you just said. Phase 2 is engineering, and including land acquisition, and phase 3 is constructions. What are those time-wise? When are these happening, do you think?
So phase 3, well, that's when everything's a go. We've awarded the project, and it would take 2 years and change to actually build that whenever it starts. But all that would follow phase 2. And then, Jeff, could you talk about how long, because there is some possibility that phase 1 and phase 2 can kind of overlap a little bit. Would you talk about that a little bit, Jeff?
Phase 1 includes kind of a review period by the state, but there are many activities in phase 2 that can happen that aren't at jeopardy of being lost if the state comes back with some changes in their phase 1 review. So a lot of that can happen concurrently towards the end of phase 1. I think the county has indicated they would be interested in helping us fund phase 2, which we don't know for sure until that goes through, but that would probably be looking about 12 months from now to start phase 2 as phase 1 is wrapping up.
But they had indicated earlier that it could be as early as this fall that we do the paperwork to move into phase 2 and start that moving too. So hopefully that's the case. But
And phase 2 would last how long, do you think? I mean, you said 12 months start of phase 2.
The way we have phase 1 set up is actually a little more robust than a normal phase 1. So phase 2 is probably, the land acquisition is the time driver in that. Phase 1 will determine if we need land acquisition, and if so, how much. The preparation of the construction documents is probably a 6-month or less task, but land acquisition with a willing partner and unwilling partner can vary by a couple of years. So it's hard to put a firm timeline on that.
Thank you, Jeff.
And the big piece of this is what is the village's tolerance and patience to see if there's going to be other financial partners in this, whether it be the state or the feds or the county still. Okay. Any other questions on this slide? Or the next slide for that matter? All right, moving right along. So we showed this slide before. This has been updated. Yeah, Bettina, you wanna
Not
cover that?
entirely, sorry.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear? We can hear you, Bettina, and see you.
Oh, okay, sorry. So my apologies, but I was supposed to update the bond payment prices in addition to just the check marks that we talked about
Yeah.
too. I could share my screen. It's updated on that if you want.
You got it.
Oh, I can't.
Now you can.
Oh, okay, thanks. So due to interest rate changes, the $10 million bond issuance would now cost $704,000 in payment a year, cover about 60% of the cost. $15 million would give us about a $1.05 million payment and cover about 89% of the costs. 20 million would come in at 1.4, cover the trunk and area 1, and 30 million would come in at 2.1 million a year and cover the project in its entirety. And that's based off 3.5% interest rate, which is in the mid range right now. It could go down, could go up, could get worse. So these numbers could change, and probably will by the time we're ready to issue debt to pay for the project.
So we're probably 36 months away, right? So.
Right.
So a question I have is Area 1 and Area 3 that's identified here, this total is really just the trunk, right? So it doesn't resolve the issues in some of the other areas?
That's right. What we
You
originally.
need the trunk first, I understand that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
the idea was the village would be able to use other sources of revenue, ideally, to cover all those feeder straws project into the trunk. That there would be ample available capital dollars that we could use to do Area 1, Area 3, and kind of chip those off over time and say that we were able to accomplish the overall project over a longer period of time, but that we would not rely on borrowing to achieve those particular elements, that we could pay as you go for those elements. That was the initial plan.
I see.
So can I just ask a follow-up question? Just based on these two areas, if we fix those two areas, what percentage of the issue is fixed at that point? Do we have any idea of that?
Let's do this. Yeah.
Or is that further on?
Well, it's part of, I'm gonna have Jeff. Jeff, would you go to the resources slides and talk about a little bit, each of those areas, just do kind of a quick overview of those areas? Each one of them, not every one of those areas that have been identified as part of the study are connected to the trunk system. A lot of them are, but not all of them.
And so I'm just asking, this Area
those-
1 and Area 3, like how much does that actually fix of the whole community? Like how
Yeah,
much?
I'm gonna show the actual area. And then. And you can decide, I guess, in terms of a percentage, what's the scale of that? Jeff, off the top of your head, those two areas in terms of scale of dollars?
Those, you're talking about Area 1 and Area 3 in addition to the trunk?
Yes.
That's $30 million. I think we had 46 million of projects identified in the other areas. I mean, the total with these 30 plus maybe 16 more in other areas that we ID'd.
So like 60 or 65% of the total.
Right, that's what I meant. I'm asking the percentage of things that
Yes.
have to be done outside of that, like that need to be fixed outside of that. I guess.
So the other 15 to 20 million, what would the source of those funds be? And are they required now, or are they paced out and later?
They would be paced out within the village's long-term capital plan and would based off prioritizing using our new system, rating system, to say these are the projects and where they fit in timing. There could be other reasons. Again, when we do those, we're gonna be planning on resurfacing a road, we'll be doing some other project. That's why it makes sense to go area by area.
I see.
I see.
Okay.
And I don't want to mislead anybody, we've identified about $46 million worth of projects, but
Needed that.
that is not a comprehensive look at every single area of the village. So the need is probably infinite. by the time you're. So this is what we've identified as major problem areas, but I don't want people to think that, we don't think they're areas of problems because we don't identify it in this study.
And part of that is just to remind everybody that, these are based off standards that are set and modified every once in a while. The 100-year storm, that benchmark just got moved, right? So somebody's always moving the goalpost.
Is that Scranton?
But I think the
The
important
one that's
idea,
not in an area is north.
Okay.
but I think the important idea is we're building a foundation to actually fix all these issues. So this is where basically investing in the future of our community. And
Yeah.
that is the important part.
And can I ask an economic question? Of the $1 million, if we were to, I think it was $15 million of bonds is $1 million payment annually. What kind of tax increase would that be for the average household in Lake Bluff, just roughly? And if you don't have.
So we
any-
have historically abated taxes and not used the levy to pay for bond debt. So in theory, based on that practice, I would assume we'd continue to abate and it would come from general funds and other revenue sources, namely the utility fee.
So the idea that the utility fee is covering the debt service.
Yeah.
That's what the goal is, to design that,
Got
to
it.
cover that.
Okay.
Now, the village could dial up or dial that back based off needs, changing scope. If the village wants to be more aggressive about it, then you can increase the utility fees, the way it's, the methodology and the units that really drive, the main variable that drives the revenue stream.
Yeah.
So,
And I know it's been a little while since we've talked about this, so
Yeah.
sorry about the
No,
kind of
that's
revisiting
a
the
great
basics.
question.
But
No,
that that utility
sorry,
fee still is an increased, expense for residents, because it's new.
and we'll get to that.
Right,
We'll
so
get to that
there's a
question.
later
Okay.
slide that we have some of the rates on, but just to give you a quick, looking at about $109 per average bill per resident gets us to about the $620,000 mark for payment of bond debt. So if we were to, slide that up a little bit to increase to cover the $10 to $15 million bond issuance, it wouldn't increase this payment tremendously per household. That's an annual bill.
So $109 annually to cover $650,000 of debt
620,
service.
right. So at 704, it might be at 115, 120.
Yeah.
And still be, comparatively speaking, much lower than some of our neighbors who are doing the same.
Yeah. And the fact is the work needs to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
So. Let's go back. So we finished that. So reminder, the methodology that staff has been taking, again, is the one based off groupings of properties similar in size, and really focusing on the numerous zoning districts of the village. That's how we coupled them all together. So it's a little, I wouldn't say it's administrative heavy, but it seems to be an appropriate way to designate the properties that make sense, and properties generally behave in terms of impervious surface coverage similarly in zoning districts. So it's an easy way to sort them.
But isn't that just heavy initially, and then moving forward after that initial, assessment is done, there wouldn't be heavy involvement?
Right, there's generally not a lot of rezonings, correct. And that's the reason why we did it, so we'll do the work up front, and then that
Right.
way, yeah, and we'll cover lots of good questions. So we'll jump right ahead. So one of the things we talked about sharing is, you asked about ballpark figure for residential unit. Well, these are some of the, we'll call them key users. A lot of these are residential, recreational, institutional, and open space type users. So these are our institutions, that may not necessarily be planning for these with their usual budget outlays. But these fees, again, these are annualized fees based off zoning district, and it's really almost like a per parcel fee. So for example, if you look at the target development, if you look at those fees, we're using L1 and L2, and Canals is a great example. It's 6 parcels at about 3,100. You get to that scale.
So Canals would be 6 times that 35.
Correct. Well, no, that's recognizing 6 parcels.
Okay. But the 3,100 is not recognizing all
On
of them.
target, correct.
Okay.
Drew, isn't the factor different for commercial properties than it is for residential? You're not using the same multiplier, right?
Jeff, would you walk through that, please?
So we're using that base rate of $109 per one ERU, which is equivalent residential unit. So our consultant, Christopher Burke, CBEL for short, looked at a sampling of each zoning district and measured how much impervious were in each, sample of their of the parcels in that district. I think they came up, it was 3,800 square feet of impervious as one ERU. So the L1, L2, like in the business park, they looked at those and sampled those. And I think the sample that they looked at were about 75% impervious. So based on the average, so then it's the ERUs per parcel goes up and down based on what their sample told them, the average impervious of a parcel in that zoning district was. Like L1, L2, we know that Rio, recreation, institutional open space, this doesn't work at all with this method because there's just such a variance between things that are very heavily paved and open space. So I think our expectation was that we would measure a lot of those kind of individually. L1, L2 doesn't work the greatest either. As we said, if it's by parcel, the entire Target store plus their drive aisle is one parcel. Chase Bank is another parcel. So that, if we just did it strictly by zoning by parcel, they'd have the same bill, as neighbors right next to each other. That feels a little bit hard to do. So we might end up looking at each L1, L2 parcel measured out. But like all the residential parcels is based on that sampling and the CBD as well.
And again, that's going back to trying to make things equitable and fair, predictable, convenient, all those things. No system's perfect. We think this is getting closer than it's been so far.
Drew, can you go back to that impact slide of the kind of key stakeholders? Just wanted to look at that one last time.
So can I,
Go ahead.
I think I've brought this up previously, but so when you look at places like the school districts and the library and the park district, their major funding sources are property tax. So I guess I just feel like I know there's a difference between a fee and a tax. And we've talked about this for a while now, but I also feel like now at this point, this is just a foregone conclusion that we're gonna adopt a storm utility fee. So I'm just struggling with the fact that I'm gonna pay $109 or whatever, $109 and change. But then I'm also, the way that I would imagine these taxing bodies are gonna pay for this is they're gonna feed it through their property tax. So now I'm gonna be paying not only like for my church and also for my park district. So it's actually a lot more than $109. And I'm sure, I'm just thinking about our seniors in the community, people that are in a little bit of a tight income. Like, it feels like it's gonna be a lot more than $109, honestly. So, and I know there's that differentiation between, well, this is a fee and these are your taxes, whatever, fine. But I don't understand, I guess I don't understand how the schools or the library, how they are gonna pass through those expenses without raising property taxes on residents.
Yeah, we don't know. We haven't sat down with them yet to talk about this. In a perfect world, we come up with some very clever ways to have them recognize or have their properties treated perhaps differently to try to manage that situation. I just don't, it gets into the equity issue, and they also, they too have impervious surfaces and they make choices about how they use their property. And so it's not that they're not contributing to the overall issue and would not also benefit from, these solutions. For example, doing the trunk system allows school to happen, right? So it's like, it's all these, they're part of the community and benefit from the system and rely on the system just as everybody does, including the village. So everybody's in the same boat, and yes, they get their fees largely through property taxes, and I don't have an answer for,
Can I just,
There is an answer to that is the intangible, that is, some people get their basement flooded, or you have a cleanup fee following a flood. And so in between spending $109 or some multiples of that and cleaning up your carpet, paying your carpet cleaner or the person cleaning up, salvaging your basement, there is a trade-off here. I mean, there is there's the intangible of, no, we are protecting your property. And we all contribute toward, we're trying to get our property saner compared to what it was before we started this project.
And maybe if we go through the credit system that we're suggesting, that helps maybe understand why the methodology is being presented this way.
If I could just add a little bit of scale, I mean, it looks to me that all of these add up, if you don't put Target and Canals in there, to roughly $50,000. And if you take $50,000 over the 620 that was mentioned earlier, that's like 8%, roughly. So I think the increase would go from $109 to $119 is kind of what I'm saying, from a magnitude standpoint, just to give you a frame of reference.
And that's the assumption that those numbers will not change. Like, we won't increase the fee.
From 109.
Right, going forward. Like, so the assumption is that it would stay at 109. We would never say, oh, you know what, we actually need to do a little bit more. So now the fee is going to go up. Fee goes up for everyone, and then you feel that reflection in everything you have. I'm just saying, to me, there's still, it's a very nebulous kind of unknown. What we're doing with this is sort of nebulous and unknown, and it's very open-ended to how we can increase it or what we can do with it. And I think we just need to be cognizant that there's, we're always talking about trying to provide housing for people so that they can stay in the community and that our older people can stay in the community. And I think we just need to be really cognizant on what we're talking about right now. I think the horse is out of the gate, right? We're going to, in some way or fashion, we're going to institute this. And I just want to make sure that we really are thinking deeply about how we do it. And I know, Regis, you probably have a comment on that. So.
Tell me if I'm wrong on that, but that would be worst case. That means if we do not bring money from any state, county, or federal government body, this is what we'll bring on the community, correct? If we were to bring something from the outside, then that 109 would be less than 109, correct?
Well, I think that what we've talked about is these utility fees, using this methodology would generate enough revenue to satisfy the debt service for a $10 million bond to pay what we anticipate or what we would expect the village to cover as part of.
So if we get 20 million, then we need 218.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So it can scale up or scale down, to Joy's point, and that's part, right? The trade-off is, okay, if they don't, who's going to pay, right? It's going to get shuffled somewhere, right?
Right.
Ideally, and so again, we're trying to make this as equitable and as rational as possible, and how they choose to pay for it, we'll have to work through it. But we haven't had those we want to share with you first before we talk to them.
And go ahead, you were gonna say.
I was just going to say that if we accept the notion that A, it has to be done, and B, it has to be paid for, then there is just many different ways in which we can choose to pay for it, but it's coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, one way or another. It is an important factor. I mean, this doesn't make it it being in your water bill or wherever it is not going to make it any easier to pay that 109 or that 218. It's still going to be, need to be paid. I guess the question is whether we want to just put it into taxes. As Bettina said, other taxing bodies, I know, for example, the school district puts the tax, what's it called? When we get the tax money for the debt service, right? So we, every year, we have the operating costs, and then we have the debt service cost, and the debt service cost is simply a part of the tax bill, right? That's another way to pay for this, but it's the same people. And I guess we have to ask ourselves whether it's more equitable to do it through the property tax system that we know about and don't like, or do it through this new system, which is collecting money from the same people in a different form or fashion, perhaps with different equitable calculations involved in terms of their impervious surface. Or I think the third one that we talked about was the transfer tax. All of that is going to the taxpayers, and what we need to decide is whether or not there's some added benefit to having a different way of collecting this money other than the property tax system and/or the transfer tax system.
Kate?
I just was thinking about the idea that I mentioned last time, because looking at other municipalities, what I haven't seen here, and maybe what would address what Joy's talking about, is a sunset provision. There's a specific period of time that it's required to debt service. If you don't have a sunset provision, then you almost guarantee that only some of those bodies that were up there that are taxing bodies will in fact have to do that, because as our costs increase, so too do theirs. And sometimes in ways that are greater than ours. So I think that that's essential if this is, I don't like to think of this as a foregone conclusion, but I do think that your point is well taken, and I think it's probably felt by other people in the community who will see this as a tax. I think it's a semantical game, frankly. It's a tax. So the other thing that I brought up last time is mitigation. Northbrook and other communities that do have mitigation credits. But I have taken it upon myself to spend a lot of money mitigating stormwater, so almost none of it leaves my property. So I think those are questions we have to address on the tax on the one hand, or the potential for increase in property taxes from other taxing bodies, and equity, certainly, it's definitely. But when you're talking, I'm thinking maybe that there's some kind of hybrid, and I say this all the time, but I think this is one of these things where it's true, this is a priority, we have to make trade-offs, and in doing that, then we have to go back and look at some of the projects that are not infrastructure projects that that definitely can be put off, and no one's basement will flood as a result. So to me, there's money there. Maybe we haven't spent money from property taxes in the past on this, but this is such a substantial need. As President Charlo points out, it's the ability for children to get to school, for fire trucks to get to the west side of town, et cetera. So I think maybe opening our minds to that, but people would probably be a lot more embracing of this if they knew that this was going to end at some point, and then maybe talking to the school park district. Having that there means that then they can figure out a way not to raise property taxes in response to this.
Bringing up the issue of the sunset provision, if we enter into this bond issuance, we need to think about the sunset provision being tied to the life of the bond, right? So your concern about having it have a sunset date, it would be tied directly to the final payment of the bond,
Right.
right?
Right, in the sense that it's used for debt service. Once the debt service
Yeah.
is over,
Right.
I think in good faith, it would be hard to explain, well, we haven't been taking all this money from you, we're just gonna find another way to use it.
Well, how many years is that bond? I mean, is that a
I don't know, but I
40-year?
think many laws have
Right.
sunset provisions, and they're on the books for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So that,
But wouldn't we, after one bond has subsided, wouldn't we
Drew,
have?
do you know what that noise is?
I suspect it's one of, I'm trying to find out, it's.
Oh, somebody
they
on
just-
the,
Mike got it. It was our
Okay.
chief of police,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
working, while he's working.
So may I just ask Bettina what the life of the bond would be, that we have this, calculated annual bond payment, that would be,
Sure, it's a 20-year term.
okay.
but
so
it's not fully amortizing, right? So there'll still be money due at the end of that, or?
I would,
No, it's a 20-year term, so at the end, you paid off,
Zero, okay.
right?
so,
I guess my question is then, if we did a bond, we're talking about how these are ongoing, like Jeff just said.
Just said
it's
there's an infinite
infinity,
number
right?
of
So
projects,
the
yeah.
reality is there would probably be another bond, and I feel like this would just be an ongoing thing. I think that's the reason why I feel like it really deserves a lot of discussion, because I even if we tie it to the bond, I don't think the bonds are going to end. I think that there'll always be a space for the bonds to do something.
Right, but what I'm trying to do is just add a little bit of logic and trying to address some of the concerns that are brought up time and time again. So it's like, okay, so what might that look like? And, you know, what might it look like if we do a $10 million bond issuance and we've outlined we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and then we find out that what we really, really, really need to do is this trunk over here with how things are changing, et cetera. Yes, you know, we may find that, and then that particular bond issuance is something that would have, again, its own life, its own sunset. But maybe we just need to step back one more and say, well, really, we don't want to look at it this as, oh, this is a foregone conclusion. Really, we can do absolutely nothing at all and continue to tolerate what we're tolerating and watch as the storms get worse and the damage gets worse, and we continue to have, you know, floods that interrupt services. We can do that. And I guess, is that what we want to do? I kind of got the conclusion that we were all saying, no, that's not what we want to do. We want to attack this as a problem and as a board. And so there are a variety of ways. So Susan, yes?
I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. So I just wanted to point out that the extending taxes in order to pay for the bond issuance, which is an option that we have not done in the past, comes with it, it would make us unable to give credits for people who are mitigating, right? One thing that that we've talked about a lot, and I think a lot of us are thinking makes a lot of sense, one thing that it enables us to do is fine tune how these things are paid for and give credit where credit is in fact due, to people who have reduced the impervious surface in their land, et cetera. So I don't think we've gotten to that.
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
But also just to point out to the point about, you know, the idea of a sunset, just to remind folks that this infrastructure we're talking about is new, right? This is not even the existing stormwater facilities that we have, which we have 25 miles of, which will need to be replaced. So this is just to fix existing flooding issues where our system doesn't handle it today.
Right.
And
This is new pipes, not
Yeah.
fixing existing like we do most of them with roads, right? We're reinvesting, we're not building a lot of new roads.
Yeah.
Right? We're resurfacing or repairing existing infrastructure. This is adding new infrastructure to solve current issues.
And can I ask Chair Ankerman and Drew, the objective of today, right, so I think we are kind of all agreeing there's a need here. What we're not all agreeing to is how we're ultimately going to pay for this. And I'm not sure if that's a decision we really need to get to today or whether that's 36 months out. I kind of get the heads up. But is that what you want us talking about today, or do you want to get through a presentation? And
Yes. Tonight's goal was to remind everybody why we got here.
Okay.
Right? This is how we got here. And it sounds like a lot of the same issues have come up.
Yeah.
And then the idea of the finance committees talked about this methodology, and there was comfort with the current methodology. And tonight we were going to introduce to you how that methodology was going to impact certain property owners, namely the institutions, and then talk about what would a credit policy look like that staff would suggest. So that's kind of the two pieces for tonight. But that was really what we were trying to accomplish.
so you want to explain that, but it sounds like there's an underlying lack
looking for
of
feedback.
consensus. You're just looking, yeah.
Tell us where we're going wrong on this. And so far, it's the finance committee anyway has been.
Well, and that's why I mean, maybe I'm saying, hey, let's back up. I'm not saying let's actually back up. I'm saying let's back up and kind of look at how did we get here by saying what really are our options. I don't want to do nothing. I don't think that's not what we said we were going to do, and I think that we need to figure out how to move forward, and certainly addressing some of the concerns that keep coming up, not from the finance committee members. I was attempting to address that. So let's move forward with kind of looking at the next phase of the credit portion of how that.
And this
What
is,
happened?
we've looked at other communities and how they managed it. And again, we're trying to make this not so administratively onerous that it's difficult to manage with the staff of that we have here at Lake Bluff. So Jeff, why don't you talk about this, maybe a little bit where we got this policy and how it would fit in Lake Bluff?
Yeah, this came straight from Libertyville. So Libertyville offers 2 credits. The first one is the only one that ever really gets used. So you have parcels that, their whole property does not touch our village stormwater system. Some lake properties are that way. Mariani Landscaping is that way, as they're kind of right between the Skokie and a railroad track. And there's a few others that are kind of bordering state property and state infrastructure. So Libertyville will give you a 50% reduction if you can prove that you don't have anything in their stormwater system. The sampling credit kind of refers to the NPDES program, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination.
That's saving some money.
And I blank on the S, but that is our permit with the state that allows us to run a stormwater system and that we discharge to waters. Generally, if you get the first one, the second one wouldn't apply to you because they only give a maximum 50% credit. You can't get both. I think Libertyville said that there is nobody who's achieved the sampling credit, but we do have areas that, and watersheds that we have to sample and monitor. And even if, say, your runoff doesn't go through our system, but it still is costing us money to monitor that watershed, then you wouldn't meet sampling credit, the credit number 2. So that is, a very simplistic system. Credits are, this one is more based on its impact to our stormwater system. Some communities have credits that are more towards trying to encourage certain behaviors, such as, on-property mitigation. But we wouldn't probably change our design of our infrastructure based on, single property mitigations. Like Target has its own pond, but this is would not receive a credit in the system because then water leaves their pond and goes through our system. Part of the thought there is we still have to keep the streets dry and maintain the infrastructure for people to get to their homes, even if their drainage doesn't touch our system or get to their businesses. So it is a community-wide effort.
So wouldn't the stormwater study already reveal the answer to number 1?
Yeah.
Not for each parcel. So our stormwater study looked at our storm sewers, and it looked at only I think it's 15 inches and above storm sewers, and modeled those. It's not hard to figure which properties, hit our stormwater system and which ones don't. Normally you'd ask that people who want a credit apply for one. So it's not that community would not normally proactively go looking to give credits out and find these properties. But I did kind of go through what I thought properties would be eligible for the credit, and that's one of the columns here, estimated potential credits.
Sorry, I was trying to highlight it and I moved through it.
And the point of this table is to kind of show you where there's credits that I think are likely to happen, and then their impact on the overall revenues. We go back to, the bond payment has to be a certain amount to get the project done. So under the system that we just talked about, there's a couple of R2s that would get credits. Those are mostly on the very west end of the West Terrace subdivision by the open lands that just kind of drain off into nothing. Some of the E1, E2, and CE are lake properties that don't drain back to the village. L1, L2, that's the DeMarie Industrial Park area around Highway 41 mostly, and CLC Jawa. AP1 is Auto Park, that is Canau's own zoning district. So that is, that would take Canau's bill from 35 to 17,000. S is Service, that's Mariani. It's their own zoning district that would have their bill as well. And then there's a couple of the open space places that don't drain into our stormwater system as well. So you see, even with this kind of simplistic credit model, you're talking about $56,000, which is pretty similar to, I think, what Trustee Rappin was saying, about 8% of our income, as we talked about, with the institutions and their fees. And the questions, would we raise the base rate to make up for this on everybody, or would we just have less of a revenue stream?
Oh,
Peter, you got a comment?
Did you have something you needed to say?
Well, you'll have to talk in the microphone. We're still recording this. You need to talk in the microphone. Sorry.
The only thing about the credits I would mention is, so we're in litigation, we're representing Peoria, and somebody is challenging their stormwater ordinance, and the credit is one of the issues that's being litigated. In Peoria, they only got down, the most you could get was down to where they didn't have any credit system like this, where you could show if you had none, but you got down to 35%, like if you had a bunch of different credits. We've argued to the court, and the court agreed with this preliminarily, that what Jeff said is correct. Even if you don't contribute any stormwater, you're still benefiting from the system. But 50% is a pretty aggressive number as a maximum credit for somebody who's is not contributing at all. There's no court in Illinois that has ruled on that issue, but at least in Peoria, they're going to probably say, or they amended it, they're saying if you contribute nothing, then you have to pay 10% of the fee. So just to give you a sense, of 50% is a very aggressive position on maximum credit for somebody who is not contributing any stormwater. I'm not saying it's not defensible, just to give you a sense of, context.
When you say aggressive, you mean it's not giving a large enough credit?
It's not, right, many give more of a credit for
More
no
credit.
contribution.
Okay.
So it would be, if somebody's gonna fight about that would be something they would focus on.
But, when you look at the whole pot of dollars shrinking to 572, then we're trying to meet, the debt service. So it just means that instead of this amount per ERU, it's going to be a bigger amount per ERU. And this also is not a credit that rewards future behavior or, a change in what is currently happening. It doesn't incentivize, if you will, anybody to do something different. It just is the way that your property is currently
Largely
draining.
geography-based,
Yeah, largely it is the way that your parcel drains, and it's not gonna be something that you can change. So that incentive isn't there in this model. All it does is it creates a smaller annual fee that we might then need to take the numbers, and if we're gonna meet the debt service of whatever fill in the blank number of dollars in bonds, to meet it, that's what we would have to do.
And Jeff, would you please talk about that? Because we talked about that internally with Scott Griffith from Seabell and talked about, counting rain barrels and, getting down to that. And,
Right.
Yeah, that really adds to the administrative component of it is, even like what Trustee Ram was talking about with the rain garden, most communities that I have seen that give a credit for that require that to be surveyed and certified that it's there, and then have like an annual maintenance agreement, and even have it, deeded on their property to ensure that it stays there in perpetuity. And, some communities do have the staff where they can dedicate a person to go looking at these things and just making sure that people who have credits are still doing what they need to do to maintain them. That's just
That's what I was.
it's more administration, and we're trying to, at least in this setup that we have here, or suggestion is trying to put every dollar we can, into projects and not in administration.
Right, and I also look at if an annual cost is on a scale of $100, $150, $200, how much am I gonna be incentivized as a homeowner to do something that mitigates my stormwater? I'm gonna be motivated by doing that because it personally is something that I have as a goal. $50 in credit is not gonna be my motivation. I'm just saying that for me, that would not be a motivator, like I'm going to do all this work and incur all this cost so that I can save $50 on the fee. I don't think that incentivizes the,
I wasn't thinking of incentive, I was thinking of sunk costs. I'm not gonna to reveal what it is, but it's more than $50 that we spent, and the rain garden's 3,500 square feet. So it's, I'd be happy to put it in a conservation easement. No problem. I have an 18,000 square foot lot, and actually my biggest concern is that someone will take my house down and build 6,000 square feet. So my question is, what happens then? Because we have this concern about administrative time and energy and cost. But we have a lot of double lots, there's one for sale right now, and it's being marketed as a house that's probably 1,100 square feet with the potential to go to 5. That's a big difference in displacement of rainwater. And right away, and it happened in my neighborhood, 1,100 square feet, 3,800 square feet. It's happening all over town. Forgetting the mitigation of what I put into my property, because I did it from an ecological and environmental standpoint, what are we gonna do about that? Because we can, if you wanna really talk equity, it is wholly inequitable to say, because things do change. Forgetting people living in certain places where it's geography, now let's talk about development, where somebody comes along, buys a lot, and buys an 1,100 square foot bungalow. There goes the, you know, the senior that was able to live in place and replaces it with something 5 times its size. Those people have to be, we have to have something built in here where staff can address those and go back, because there's a big difference in those two things, and that's a negative impact that there has to be some way to account for that, because it can't be the same.
Isn't the stormwater detention that's required when there's a, you know,
Tear down.
a tear down, that's part of something that's, you know,
As well as-
codified
yeah.
to address that. But if people want to build within what is already, you know, as of right, they're allowed to do.
Yeah, I mean, and there's zoning code regulations that monitor how much can be built, how much impervious surface can be built in those zoning districts. It's still subject to all those same regulations.
Except, for example, we know that certain things don't go to bulk, pools, et cetera. So I'm just curious, and it's about a 1,500 gallon tank, but it still goes into the system. Eventually, it has to be emptied. It's just a question, 'cause albeit at a much lower pace as
Joy?
rates go up.
Did you have something you wanted to
Yeah,
contribute?
I just had a quick comment. I think that, like, I like the idea of having, I know it sounds like administratively, like it's a nightmare, but the idea of having some kind of credit for enhancing your property or making it more green or creating less impervious surface on your property. I think the people that do that, they do that because that comes from the heart, right? It's something that they believe in. And I feel like we could have some simplified credit policy for that. I don't think there would be that many people actually that would hit that threshold. And so from an administrative standpoint, I just don't feel like it would be that much of a burden. And I think it would be a nice compromise for the community to give some kind of small credit policy. I'm not talking about anything,
Right, but I
you
mean,
know, enormous. I'm just saying, it's almost like just a nod to the community if people are interested in doing that in their yard.
I understand the sentiment. I don't know if it will change behavior. And so that's my only concern, is that we're adding a layer of someone checking one more box or whatever. And maybe it's, you know, if we want to do a one-time credit, but to alter a future utility fee source in perpetuity, you know, for the life of the fee, adds up, right? And overall, again, the fee annualized is not that large. So if they were to get a credit, I mean, pick a number, what would be the credit? That would be, you know, I'm just struggling with what we could do that seems like it's changing future behavior, which I think we would want to do, is we want to incentivize. And I guess I wanted to hear about the credit that's being proposed of, you know, the methodology being that if you can prove that 100% of your runoff does not enter the village stormwater system, is that something that we're willing to consider? Because we're talking about all these other injustices and other, you know, reward programs, but
That's an
Maybe there's a way to do it at permit level. You know, that there's other ways than through this program. There's different ways to, I mean, the board has done that with, like, for electric vehicles and waiving the sticker fees, or, you know, there's different ways to do it at different points
Incentivize.
in the process to incentivize the behaviors that you're looking to.
Exactly.
You know, so we can certainly come back with different ideas for that too, and see if there's other examples for that.
I think that makes sense? Regis?
Yes, so I've been listening very intently and I followed the line from Kate. And I was imagining the different use cases for, okay, we have a neighborhood of houses that are 1,500 square feet, and all of a sudden we have houses that are 4 times the size. And guess what? I used to live on Moffett and Washington, and that's what happened to us. So the point is, okay, so that was one house next to us that was 4 times bigger. And then it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 houses that were bigger than ours. And so to your point about, well, you should do retention for the water that is in your yard so that you can keep it there. Guess what? My yard became a lake. So I couldn't keep that stuff. So perverse effect that is now the smallest house in the neighborhood is the one who basically funnels of that water. That's first perverse effect. The second thing is, I think that's actually the worst one. And so how do we create a credit from that? I think the effect is, do we trust for surface to become credit, or do we have, and we don't have much administrative cost to maintain that? Or do we review properties of a much higher administrative cost to a much more equitable system?
Well, I think Drew is marrying the timing of the change to the impact financially to the homeowner directly, which is at the time of an addition or a demolition or fill in the blank, being the time at which the financial impact would be.
And when those administrative that's when Jeff Hansen and Mike Croker are
Exactly.
looking at the projects and from an administrative standpoint, that's the most efficient way to manage that.
And it's also more equitable because that's when it's, the big change is happening.
But I agree with that, but I think the perverse effect is many times the water that are in my garden are not my waters.
Understood,
They came from somewhere else, and I think this is the kicker.
right.
I don't know how to account for that, by the way.
Well, it's incrementally as changes occur. I mean, we are where we are as of right now, but as the next house has its addition or the next house gets torn down and something larger gets created, that's the point to address how we can not have it increase.
It seems like we're talking about two different things, just from a
absolutely.
standpoint of having done a lot of this work for people in landscaping where they are addressing this. We're talking about the stormwater runoff from neighbors' property onto others due to displacement or at least in the North Terrace topography, because we have it really, like, the terraces have a lot of topography that isn't everywhere else in town. But what you just said made me think of something else too. Perhaps the way to meet in the middle, if just trying to think of equity, is we're talking about giving credits to commercial enterprises because of their location, or other people because of their location, and not doing it for people that have mitigated it proactively. How about neither? I mean, that's equitable, right?
Well, I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is
How about
don't
neither?
reward people for the fact that they happen to live on the lake. And not reward the person that underwent significant engineering costs to mitigate stormwater. That is nonsensical. So you're rewarding just a fluke as opposed to proactive behavior. That's wholly inequitable. So neither. The fact that Canals and Mariani happen to be where they are, if we're talking about this as something that you mentioned, where we're all the beneficiaries of it, certainly Canals and Mariani are. Mariani's clients, many of whom are on the east side, if the viaduct floods, they can't get to them. So how do we rationalize that based purely on geography if we're not gonna do it the other way? That's not equitable to me at all.
So can I ask Village Attorney Friedman, I mean, have you heard of the neither situation before? I mean, that certainly gets you out of a litigious situation, I would think. Or maybe not.
A situation where there are no credits?
Where there are no credits. I mean, I think Trustee Briand is saying it's not fair that just based on geography you get a credit, but if you've done mitigation, you don't. So why don't we just clean the slate?
Has not been litigated. I will tell you that having credits eliminates one large chunk of argument that people can complain about, because,
They're not contributing to the problem.
what's that?
Because number one, they're not contributing to the issues.
Well, right, so this is a fee, right? It's not a tax. So a fee is supposed to be a fee in exchange for some service. And courts say that. And we've been able to argue successfully that, no, the service is being provided, even though we're not measuring the amount of water that falls during a rainstorm, like impervious surfaces are reasonably related, that works. And we always say, and when this got litigated in Winnetka had 100% credit. So we could say, if somebody can show that they're not contributing, they can get out of it. So there's no argument that people are paying for something they're not getting. But if you don't have any credit, then they have that argument. I got lots of good arguments that they're still benefiting from it. It still makes sense as a community-wide thing, but it's a much harder argument to make.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that live in town that don't have kids in the school district, but they still pay the tax. So why wouldn't we shift this to a tax and take that argument?
I was just thinking the same thing. Boy.
Roll it into
And
property.
Peter, I was gonna ask you, so in terms of getting what you're paying for, doesn't, for example, a clear viaduct means faster response time for fire for both of those entities, ability of clients and providers to get back and forth. So they are getting something.
Something. They're getting something.
They're getting
but are
something. I mean, they're here, they're getting the benefit of, it's like,
But is that 100% of some? Is that something 100% of the fee? That's for somebody who's not contributing to the cause, they're still getting a benefit.
Right. If one of our concerns is having a policy where the fee structure is less likely to elicit litigation, is that really a concern? Or is that really a very minor concern, and we don't really need to make that be a huge driver in setting our policy? I mean, which, is the tail wagging the dog? Or should we just set the policy based on, these ERUs, and if there's logic and pattern behind it, and end of story? How much do we need to be concerned about litigation, about fairness and equity?
Is that a question to me?
I don't know that anybody else can answer that.
it's a
Yeah.
great question,
Yeah.
actually.
Well, the only thing I could say is, Winnetka got sued, Peoria's gotten sued.
And Winnetka had a credit, right?
And who-
And so the credit is
Neighbor,
part of, it wasn't enough?
one residential owner.
That's
in
what I
Winnetka.
wanted to know,
One
whether.
residential
because-
owner.
So that was my question, versus, for example, commercial enterprises.
Peoria got sued by a shopping mall,
Shopping mall?
And they had credits, or they did not have credits?
Peoria had credits, could not get down to zero. The most they could get down to was 35%.
And the-
And Peoria then, in the course of the litigation, amended it to get down to 90%. Because this,
90% credit,
90% credit,
yeah.
right.
Is there some reason I can't think of that you know of why this is better to be treated as a fee as opposed to a tax? I mean,
Well, it's just a completely different, the legal framework is it's just completely different. You're a home rule municipality, you have the right to, use property tax for this, you have the right to, and that's a revenue raising thing. It does not need to be tied to a service.
And PTEL limits.
We have utility limits.
Right, so,
One of the first things we talked about, utility
Yeah.
fee,
Right.
real estate tax,
Yeah.
property, you have different paths you can take.
Would be really interesting to see how those different paths impact a typical resident or a set of typical residents. Maybe it's a paper that doesn't need to be written, but it would be interesting. Are we really moving around little pieces of money that in the long run do not significantly differ between those three different ways of collecting the fees, the money? How typical, let me ask a different question, and I know it's 7, but how typical is it for entities to not extend taxes to pay debt service? So we have just decided not to do that. We don't extend the taxes we could over and above PTEL, right? It's not, I know we keep PTEL voluntarily as well,
Right,
but,
right.
but for those who are bound by PTEL, debt service can be taxed separately and we choose not to do so. Is that common?
A lot of times, I mean, they do it with double barrel bonds, pledge different revenue sources to do it first, like sales tax first, property tax second. So it's really situational. It's, I don't, maybe that paper's been written somewhere.
It
to your
has
point.
been, I'm sure.
But it's very situational. I mean, you're trying to, I can certainly bring back some more ideas, but we can continue this conversation.
I feel like that, you know, we haven't moved very far along, and I feel like with the concerns and the, you know, questions that have been asked, I feel like perhaps staff could be directed to give some other ideas on how we can get a wider lens, a bigger picture of the large impact. Perhaps we weren't quite as far along as we had hoped.
Still ahead of schedule.
Still ahead of schedule. Okay,
Okay, good.
all right.
Can I just make one small comment with regards to the abatement?
Yes,
Yeah.
Bettina?
Yeah,
So when you're abating the taxes, it in effect just takes it off the tax bill. So you're not pre-committing that payment as a municipality for the bond debt. However, you're still bound to make that payment.
yes.
So it's coming from a different source, that being your general fund or the dollars that you have the freedom to allocate. So by not abating it, you're putting it on the tax bill, and now you've committed resources that are part of that original bucket of money, removing it from corporate and police pension and other areas that are also committed. And so it restricts your spending. So as a home rule community, it gives you a little bit more leverage to allocate your resources the way you want.
Great.
Thank you, Bettina.
Good answer, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's helpful. Can I just ask, in terms of, right, so we didn't make it as far as we wanted to on this today, Chair Ackerman, but is there a sense of urgency? Is there a timeline, something looming where we really do need to make some progress here?
Well, according to Drew, we're still ahead of, you know, schedule, right? So
Yes, yeah.
when might we be able to, as a finance committee, come together again?
2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks from tonight?
If, I know you're not here, and you're out too. 4 weeks from
4
tonight,
weeks from tonight.
first meeting in June.
Okay, I will be here. Hopefully.
We'll be here.
Hopefully you guys can do, okay. If there are no other items to discuss, we should call this meeting to a close. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is now adjourned. We'll take a short recess until the village board meeting in a couple of minutes.
Thank you. It is 7:04. Let's get
Oh, just go
together
ahead.
at 7:12,
Okay,
7:10, 7:10.
5 minutes.
thank you.
That cookie's so good.